Welcome back. Joe Garcia was a Democratic member of Congress elected in 2012. He served one term representing South Dade and the Florida Keys. In the 90s, he helped lead the Cuban American National Foundation, which for years advocated a hard line on Cuba. But over the last decade, Garcia has advocated for more engagement with the island and supported President Obama's efforts to normalize relations in 2016. I started by asking him what he expected the Biden administration to do when it came to Cuba.
Look, I wouldn't mind Obama 2.0, but I think more realistically, what you're going to see is an administration that's going to look at the humanitarian angle of this, travel, remittances, helping civil society. I think they're going to lean in aggressively in that area and move with those things right off the bat. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I think Joe Biden has a deep understanding of Latin America, as you know, to some very broad degree. He sort of ran a lot of the Latin American relationships. And Cuba is clearly one of those issues, right? And we have to be honest, you know it because you live here. The Cuban American community has 10 members of the legislative branch of the United States government. And they have their views, and their views are going to be taken into effect or into consideration. Just like, Marco Rubio was a definer to some degree on a lot of President Trump's views on Latin America. There's no question that Senator Bob Menendez is going to play a big role, as will Albio Sires from New Jersey. That said, I think there are things here that make sense across the board and that you can find a lot of unity on. And then secondly, I also think that they're going to want to grow their base. We got our hat handed to us pretty badly in Dade County, and politics is a game of addition. There's going to be an election in 2 years. There are seats that are going to be with freshman members. All of them, to some degree, are going to be freshman members because redistricting is going to affect these districts. As you can imagine, we're going to get 1 or 2 new congressional seats. Those seats, one of them will come down to South Florida, and I don't know how you design them to hold for Republicans, in the Hispanic community.
There are those who believe and say that the Obama policy was a failure. We saw no real changes within Cuba as a result of the Obama policy. So if returning to it, even modifying it, won't that just open the door for Republicans to be able to, again, brand Democrats as socialists or socialist sympathizers or Marxists or whatever they want to say?
Well, look, let's begin with, it wasn't a failure. There were less people in jail. There was more civil society. There was more exchange. I met more dissidents on the street of Miami from Cuba than I ever did in Cuba. So the reality is that it opened up society. You saw more change in the last 2 years of the Obama administration than you saw in the previous 60 years of the Cuban Revolution. But even more importantly, what it wasn't a repudiation of was the fact that Hillary Clinton got overwhelming support in this community for a Democrat, where she got more votes than her husband. She got more votes even than Obama. And the reality is the reason she did so well in the midst of Obama policy on Cuba, which she completely embraced, is because it made sense to Cuban Americans. Now, do I think that the Cubans need to do more? Absolutely. I think that they've got to lean in. They failed to do it. I think we as a Cuban American community have to lean in. But I think to say that policy was a failure is simply to avoid the facts. There were less jailings, less repression in Cuba. There was more economic opportunity. There was a thriving of small businesses. There was quite literally a flourishing of discussion and debate, both in Miami, where you had Cuban artists from Cuba traveling here. Now the Cubans have to do more to let Cuban artists from South Florida go to Cuba. And I think they failed in that.
But speaking of artists, I mean, you're well familiar with the crackdown on Cuban artists that are taking place on the island, the heavy-handed of repression. And we haven't seen this since the ladies in white. This is a new generation that is being fought against. So again, my question becomes, does it not then seem as if we're rewarding the Cuban government by returning to the old policy at a time when they are as repressive as ever?
Well, the question is, they're repressive as ever because our policies were as regressive as ever. And so I think that if we lean into a progressive policy that helps civil rights, I'd rather have the ladies in white visiting Joe Biden in the White House than us watching cell phone footage of people getting beaten in Cuba. What we know is that as that society opened up, as there was more contact, there was less repression, there was more opportunity, there was more exchange, there was more of a fervent dialogue on all areas: human rights, journalism, free expression. Is it what you and I want? No. Am I justifying what exists in Cuba today? Of course not. But what I do know is that things were better 4 years ago than they are today. And the idea to say that you embrace the Trumpian mindset, it produced nothing but misery and suffering in Venezuela, and it has only made the lot of the Cuban people worse for it, with absolutely no movement towards what we all want, which is a more equitable, more prosperous, and a freer Latin America.
I can hear Marco Rubio in the back of my head saying the problem in Cuba is not that the Trump administration was harsh with them. The problem in Cuba is because of the Cuban government repressing its people. It has nothing to do with what the Trump administration did towards them.
Well, look, I can hear Marco Rubio in the back of my head because he's a good friend, and I think well of him. But the reality is that the policy positions that this administration took literally failed across the board. And so what I believe we should do is go back to a policy that promoted change, that promoted evolution, not revolution. And what we saw is more change in those last 2 years of Obama than we saw in the previous 50 years. And what we certainly have seen in the last 4 years is a regression on every single front that Marco Rubio thinks is important, and that I think is important, and that you think is important. So
you were recently in Cuba. Tell me about what you saw, and what are you trying to do while you're in Cuba? Are you trying to engage in business opportunities there? Is that, talk to me about where you're at. I know that you recently, with a businessman in the United States, a Cuban American, brought some PPP, some supplies as it related to, the COVID crisis there.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about what you're hoping to achieve there, and what your long-term goals are with Cuba.
When this COVID crisis started, I think it gave a lot of us a huge, long pauses of time to reflect. And I remember the difficulty of getting COVID or PPE in South Florida, and how difficult many institutions were finding it. And I thought to myself, this must be really tough in Cuba. And then I saw some coverage from Cuba. And then myself and Saul Barenthal, who's been a big funder and a big person on leaning in on creating opportunity in Cuba, we got together with a few other Cuban Americans, and we said, how can we make a difference here? And so we began this process of collecting things that you could send. At the beginning, it started very small, some hand sanitizer. At one point, PPE could not be exported. That law changed. So what we did is something that the Cuban government said was impossible to do. So I want to begin by saying they were wrong. We asked for a permit from the US government. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Trump administration. They gave us, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Commerce, the OFAC gave us a license so we could export this stuff when it became legal. During that process, that took a very long time negotiating with Cuba on the delivery, because of course you have to negotiate with the customs service in Cuba. You have to find an importer that you take it. And then because our license, the US license, requires the final destination, we picked the hospital in Cuba that would be the recipient, which is the main hospital that takes COVID patients in Cuba. So we went through that whole process, and right as about we were going to send the shipment, Trump changed the regulation, and he said private flights could no longer go to Cuba. Charters weren't traveling and regular flights weren't traveling, so we couldn't send it. As soon as the regular flight started, we were kind enough to, the guys from Havana Air, which I know and are good folks, they negotiated one of the guys that was part of our group to give us some very good rates on sending all this heavy stuff on the bottom of the plane. And we finally were able to figure it out.
How do we know that it reaches the people who need it?
Well, the least common sense many times is common sense. I mean, what are you going to do with PPE? It's not like it's going to be used at some chemical weapons lab. This is stuff that can only be used to keep other people from getting sick. And the reality is Cuba for a long time was complaining about their inability and lack of access to some of these things. So I assume that if you take it to a hospital that is dealing with patients of this kind, this is not anything except something used to keep other people from being sick. In Cuba, it appears from every statistic we read, has done a relatively good job. They have the capacity to really clamp down. They put these huge fines on people, and it was, to me, startling, right? Because I'm coming from Miami, where people don't wear masks everywhere. At one point, I was traveling in the outskirts of Atlanta, and there was a guy in the middle of the field plowing his field with an oxen, and he was wearing a face mask. So the reality is they've been very aggressive. Secondly, I think it is this week we're having someone visit that facility to visit with the doctors there because they wanted to thank them in person. That's Saul Barenthal, who's going to be traveling there, and I think you've got to have some sense of what's going on here. If let's assume they didn't use it at the hospital, what would they be using it for if not to protect people? And in the end, listen, when you do something out of good faith, you have to assume some good faith on the other side.
We'll be right back.